The ability to rain death from above in unceasing terms is surely something that strikes fear into the hearts and minds of any opposition being targeted. Over the years, the superpowers have been in the race to outwit each other in becoming the master of air by competing to build the fastest and the most fearsome bomber in history. But so far, only one of them has been dubbed the personification of death and the fastest bomber ever conceived. Meet America's XB-70 Valkyrie, the world's fastest bomber. In today's video, we'll share with you all the details of America's XB-70 Valkyrie and what made it the world's fastest and most fearsome bomber in history. As the diplomatic and proxy standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union known as the Cold War began in the early 50s, both sides deployed ever-increasing stockpiles of nuclear warheads. These were prepared to be launched with missiles launched from standalone sites, submarines, and as bombs dropped by huge strategic bombers. Both sides had their own, and these were specifically designed to fly over to the enemy side across huge distances and drop their nuclear payloads off for mass destruction if it ever came to it. In 1955, the United States Air Force published General Operational Requirement No. 38 for a new bomber that combined the payload and intercontinental range of the B-52, which was subsonic with the Mach 2 top speed of the Convair B-58 Hustler, a comparably limited range and limited capacity supersonic bomber. The new bomber was set to go into service in 1963. Nuclear and non-nuclear designs were both considered. The nuclear-powered bomber was designated Weapons System 125A, and it was pursued alongside the jet-powered variant, Weapons System 110A. Two companies, Boeing and North American Aviation, presented preliminary concepts in mid-1956. However, preliminary studies were unsatisfactory. The two designs had takeoff weights of around 750,000 pounds and heavy fuel loads. The Air Force studied the designs and determined that they were too large and complicated for operational use in September 1956. General Curtis LeMay of the Air Force was particularly dismissive, claiming, "This is not an airplane, it's a three-ship formation." In October 1956, the USAF terminated Phase 1 development and directed the two contractors to continue design research. While the original proposals were being researched, supersonic flight was rapidly progressing. The narrow delta was replacing earlier designs like the swept wing and trapezoidal layout seen on designs like the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, and the earlier WS-110 ideas as the preferred platform for supersonic flight. Engines that could withstand higher temperatures were also being developed, enabling supersonic speeds to be maintained. This research led to an unusual finding, something that is not well known among aviation circles or supersonic planes. When an engine was optimized for high speed, it burnt roughly twice as much gasoline as when it was running at subsonic speeds or below the speed of sound. The plane that was being drawn up, on the other hand, would be flying at up to 4 times that normal speed. As a result, its maximum speed was the most cost-effective cruise speed in terms of fuel per mile. The proposed bomber was given the designation B-70 in February 1958, with the prototypes given the X experimental prototype designation. In early 1958, the name Valkyrie was chosen from 20,000 submissions in the USAF's name the B-70 contest. In March 1958, the Air Force approved an 18-month program acceleration, pushing the maiden flight back until December 1961. However, due to a shortage of finance, the service declared in late 1958 that this acceleration would not be achievable. A Phase 2 contract was granted in December 1958, and in March 1959, the Air Force examined a mock-up of the XB-70. Following that, funding for air-to-surface missiles and external fuel tanks was requested. The first drawing of the XB-70 was provided to the public in early 1960 by North America and the United States Air Force. The B-70 production version was supposed to use a high-speed, high-altitude bombing approach, which followed a trend of bombers flying faster and higher since manned bombers were first used. However, in 1960, Gary Powers' U-2 was shot down by the S-75 Dvina, one of the first Soviet-guided air defense missiles. Nothing was safe if the U-2 wasn't. Bombers, least of all. Faced with this dilemma, the military doctrine has already begun to shift away from supersonic bombardment at high altitudes and toward low-altitude penetration. Because radar operates on a line-of-sight basis, aircraft might drastically reduce detection distances by flying near the ground and concealing behind terrain. When attacking aircraft at high altitudes, missile sites positioned to overlap in range would create enormous gaps in coverage for bombers flying at lower altitudes. The bombers could fly through and around the defenses if they had a good map of missile positions. Low-level flying also provided covers for fighters. If a higher altitude aircraft's radar was focused on detecting objects at a lower altitude, the ground reflection would overpower the signal received from a target. Strategic Air Command was in an awkward situation. Bombers had been tuned for efficiency at high speeds and altitudes, a performance that had come at a considerable cost in terms of both engineering and money. SAC had launched the B-58 Hustler to replace the Boeing B-47 Stratojet in the medium-range function before the B-70 was to replace the B-52 in the long-range duty. In comparison to the B-47, the Hustler was expensive to develop and buy, requiring a lot of fuel and maintenance. The B-52, which was significantly larger and had a greater range, was anticipated to cost 3 times as much to operate. In comparison to the B-58, the B-57 suffered significantly more. It was designed for higher speeds, altitudes, and ranges. The B-70 was 4 times quicker than the B-52 at high altitudes, but at low altitudes, it was limited to Mach 0.95, just slightly faster than the B-52 at the same altitudes. The bomb load was also smaller, and the range was shorter. Its only significant advantage would be the capacity to travel at high speeds in places lacking missile protection, particularly on long route from the United States to the Soviet Union. Any advantages were slim, and the project was looking to be a waste. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General Twining, recommended the Air Force's plan for the B-70 to reconnoiter and strike rail mobile Soviet ICBMs at 2 secret meetings on November 16th and 18th, 1959. However, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General White, admitted the Soviets would be able to hit the B-70 with rockets and requested the B-70 be downgraded to a bare minimum research and development program at $200 million for the fiscal year. The Air Force declared in December 1959 that the B-70 project would be reduced to a single prototype and that most of the intended B-70 subsystems would be scrapped. Then, due to the politics of the 1960 presidential race, interest grew, and it became a political instrument. The B-70 was used to illustrate how Eisenhower and the Republicans were weak on defense during John F. Kennedy's campaign. He told a San Diego audience near North American aviation facilities, "I endorse wholeheartedly the B-70 manned aircraft." However, his tone would change in office. On March 28, 1961, after spending $800 million on the B-70 program, Kennedy canceled it as unnecessary and economically unjustifiable. Air Force officials still tried nonetheless. Curtis LeMay, in particular, emphasized his B-70 advocacy after bombing the new Air Force Chief of Staff in July 1961, including interviews for August Reader's Digest and November Aviation Week articles, and allowing a February 25th General Electric tour, where the press was given artist conceptions of and other information about the B-70. In an effort to revive the bomber development, Congress had also renewed B-70 appropriations. After Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara told the House Armed Services Committee on January 24, 1962, that the B-70 was indefensible, LeMay pushed for it in front of the House and Senate committees, admonished by McNamara. By March 7, 1962, the HASC, 21 of whose members had B-70 work in their districts, had crafted an appropriations bill that would order the executive branch to use up all the approximately $500 million in funds authorized for the project, which would be comparable to $4.5 billion today. McNamara's statement to the HASC on March 14th was unsuccessful. Still, an 11th-hour White House Rose Garden compromise between Kennedy and HASC Chairman Carl Vinson on March 19, 1962, reversed the bill's language and the bomber was canceled. However, the prototypes were built and were slated to be used for advanced research in aerodynamics, propulsion, and other aspects of massive supersonic transports. A navigator and a bombarder were not required for this research mission. The crew was reduced to only the 2 pilots, and in March 1961, the production order was cut to 3 prototypes, with the 3rd plane incorporating improvements from the preceding one. Later, the purchase was cut to 2 experimental XB-70s known as Air Vehicle 1 and 2. The XB-70 No. 1 was completed on May 7, 1964, and delivered to Palmdale, California on May 11, 1964. Nothing like that ever existed, according to one report. On October 15, 1964, AV-2 was completed. The 3rd prototype was canceled before it could be completed in July 1964, however. On the 3rd test flight on October 12, 1964, the Valkyrie went supersonic, and 2 days later, the XB-70 No. 1 broke the Mach 3 barrier by reaching Mach 3.02 at 70,000 feet. The honeycomb panels on the first aircraft were found to have flaws owing to inexperience with the manufacture and quality control of this novel material. Honeycomb panels failed and tore off during supersonic flight on 2 occasions, requiring the aircraft to be restricted to Mach 2.5. On the second XB-70, which flew for the first time on July 17, 1965, the flaws detected on the AV-1 were virtually fully fixed. XB-70 number 2 reached Mach 3.05 while flying at 72,000 feet on January 3, 1966. On April 12, 1966, AV-2 hit Mach 3.08 and sustained it for 20 minutes. AV-2 hit Mach 3.06 on May 19, 1966, and flew at Mach 3 for 32 minutes, covering 2,400 miles in 91 minutes. The National Sonic Boom Program was a combined NASA-USAF research program from November 3, 1966 to January 31, 1967 to measure the intensity and signature of sonic booms. The testing sought to explore a range of sonic boom overpressures on the ground that was similar to, but higher than those predicted by the proposed American SST. One of the prototypes, AV-2, was chosen for the program and fitted with test sensors in 1966. On June 6, 1966, it flew the first sonic boom test, reaching Mach 3.05 at 72,000 feet. After a mid-air collision with an F-104 while flying in a multi-aircraft formation 2 days later, AV-2 crashed. On December 17, 1968, the XB-70 made its final supersonic flight. AV-1 made its final flight to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on February 4, 1969 for museum display. The B-1 bomber program, the American Supersonic Transport Program, and the Soviet Union's Tupolev Tu-144 SST program all used data from the XB-70 test flights and aerospace materials development. The development of the Lockheed U-2 and SR-71 Blackbird reconnaissance planes, as well as the XB-70, motivated Soviet aerospace experts to design and construct the MiG-25 Inceptor, which could fly at high altitudes and speeds. The research experience gained from the project influences aircraft design today, as design innovations prove that larger airplanes could fly supersonically. We just have to find a way to solve the fuel and sound issues. It never saw service, but it nonetheless positively impacted plane tech. So, what do you think about the XB-70? Share your thoughts in the comments, and we'll try to reach as many of you as possible.